In a faraway galaxy, there was an empire ruled by a mighty king. His name was Zorith, and he was feared and respected across the stars. His people, the Archon, were known for their advanced technology and powerful warriors. They had conquered many worlds and brought peace to countless civilizations. But King Zorith's empire was now facing a new kind of threat: internal rebellion and growing distrust from neighboring species. His power, once unchallenged, was starting to slip. Zorith knew that his people needed something more than weapons or soldiers to survive this crisis. They needed a leader who could unite the empire, someone who could see beyond power and violence. And so he turned to his daughter, Princess Illyra. Princess Illyra was the only child of King Zorith, and though she was extremely intelligent and kind-hearted, she lacked the physical strength of her father. Her body, delicate and frail, had always been a source of disappointment to the king. In their society, warriors were celebrated, and strength was everything. Illyra had spent her life studying tactics, history, and diplomacy, but she had never been trained for combat. King Zorith loved his daughter dearly, but he knew that the time had come for her to change. "Daughter," Zorith said one evening in the royal palace, his voice stern but filled with a hint of concern, "I have sent for help from the humans of Earth. They are a race known for their warriors. You will go to their world and learn from them. You will become strong." Illyra's eyes widened in shock. Humans were known to be fierce fighters, but their technology was primitive compared to the Archons. She had heard stories of their bravery, but she had never imagined that she would be sent to learn from them. She had always relied on her mind and intellect, never on her physical abilities. How could she, a princess with no fighting skills, possibly survive on a world like Earth? "My king," Illyra asked softly, "how will I be able to learn from them? I am not like them. I am not strong." King Zorith's gaze softened, and he placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Illyra, strength is not only physical. It is found in the heart, in your will to persevere. The humans are known for their toughness, not just in battle, but in their spirit. They will teach you that, and once you have learned from them, you will return stronger. You will lead our empire, and you will help bring peace." Though unsure and filled with doubt, Illyra nodded. She knew she had no choice. Her father had spoken, and she could not refuse. The fate of the empire was now in her hands. And so, she prepared to leave for Earth, not knowing what awaited her on the distant world. As she boarded the royal ship and left the palace behind, Illyra gazed at the stars, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. She didn't know what kind of warrior she would become, but she was determined to find out. The journey from the far reaches of the galaxy to Earth was long, but Illyra never once took her eyes off the stars. She had left behind her world, her people, and the comfort of her father's palace. Now she was headed to a strange planet, filled with unfamiliar challenges. As the royal ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the bright blue skies and vast landscapes below seemed so different from the cold, metallic halls of her home. The ship landed in a small, remote military base, just outside of a bustling city. Illyra stepped off the ship, her white robe flowing gently in the wind. She was greeted by a group of soldiers, who eyed her with a mix of curiosity and doubt. They had been told that a royal alien princess would be arriving, but they had never expected someone who looked so delicate. Illyra felt their eyes on her, their judgment in the air, but she held her head high. "Princess Illyra, welcome to Earth," said a tall man with short black hair and a stern expression. He was Captain Marcus Shaw, a seasoned human soldier known for his skill and leadership. "I'll be your guide and instructor during your stay." Illyra nodded politely, trying not to let the unease she felt show. She had no idea what to expect from these humans, but she knew she had to prove herself. "Thank you, Captain Shaw. I am ready to learn." Shaw raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her calm demeanor. He had been briefed on her background: the princess of a powerful alien empire, but untrained in combat. He had seen many warriors come through the base, but none quite like her. Still, he respected the king's decision to send her. If she was going to learn from Earth's soldiers, it would be his job to make sure she got the proper training. The training began immediately. The Lyra was given a standard human soldier's uniform, not much different from the one Shaw wore, and was led to the combat training field. The soldiers there were ready, each of them expecting to see a delicate princess struggle. They were used to the harsh training, the sweat and pain that came with preparing for battle. Elira, however, seemed out of place among them. Her first test was basic hand-to-hand combat. She was paired with a strong, burly soldier who had years of experience. Elira stepped forward, but the soldier barely had to use any strength to send her tumbling to the ground. She landed hard, her breath knocked out of her. The soldiers laughed, but Captain Shaw quickly raised a hand to silence them. Elira stood up, brushing off the dust from her robe. She was humiliated, but she did not give up. She had been taught to never back down, even when the odds were against her. As she stood there, trying to catch her breath, Shaw could see the fire in her eyes. He wasn't sure what she had inside her, but he could tell she wasn't like the others who had quit after their first failure. Again, Elira said, her voice steady. Captain Shaw gave her a hard look. Most soldiers would have begged for mercy after a fall like that, but Elira wasn't like most people. She was determined to prove herself, no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. The training had just begun, and though Elira was struggling, something deep within her stirred. She was far from ready, but she had taken the first step. Days turned into weeks, and Princess Elira's training continued. Each day, she faced new challenges, and each day, she struggled. The humans around her did not hold back. They expected her to learn quickly, but the reality of combat was far more difficult than she had imagined. Her body, still frail and untrained, could not keep up with the demands of the physical world she now found herself in. The harsh sun beat down on the training grounds as Elira ran laps with the rest of the soldiers. Her legs ached, and her chest burned with every step. While the humans seemed to run effortlessly, Elira stumbled behind, her body not built for such intense physical exertion. Sweat poured from her face, but she kept going. She had to. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. You will learn. You will become strong. But even with those words pushing her forward, the princess couldn't help but feel a growing sense of doubt. The more she trained, the more she realized just how different she was from the humans. They had the strength, the stamina, the muscle that she lacked. They moved with ease, while Elira felt as though her body was betraying her at every turn. One afternoon, Elira was paired up with a soldier for a sparring session. This soldier was experienced, his movements swift and precise. He was much stronger than her, and the moment the match began, he took advantage of her hesitation. He pushed her to the ground with little effort, knocking the wind out of her once again. The soldiers watching from the sidelines laughed, some even making rude comments about her inability to fight. Elira's face burned with embarrassment. She couldn't understand why it was so hard. She had trained her mind for years, studying battle strategies and tactics, but it seemed like her body was always a step behind. Captain Shaw walked over to her, his expression unreadable. He knelt beside her, offering her a hand to help her stand. You're not like the others, Elira, he said quietly. You're not going to win these battles by trying to be like them. You'll need to find your own strength. Elira looked at him, confused. But how? I can't even stand up to them. How can I be strong? Shaw's eyes softened. Strength isn't just about muscles or speed. It's about resilience. It's about finding your inner will and using it when everything else is failing. Elira took a deep breath and nodded. She had always relied on her mind and intellect, but here, on Earth, she needed something more. She had to dig deeper than she ever had before. If she wanted to survive, she had to find the strength within herself. The next day, when the training session began, Elira stood a little taller. She wasn't going to quit. She couldn't afford to. Even if she fell again, she would get up. She would keep fighting, keep pushing forward, because deep down, she knew that the future of her people depended on it. Captain Shaw watched Princess Elira with careful eyes as she struggled through her training. He could see the change in her, the fire that burned within her, but it was clear that she still had a long way to go. Elira's progress was slow, but it was there. She was beginning to understand what it meant to push past her limits. However, Shaw knew it was time to put her to the test. Today, Shaw said, his voice firm, "We're going to see if all this training has paid off. You'll face a real challenge." Elira looked up, her heart racing. She had been waiting for this moment. She had been preparing for it, even though part of her feared what would happen. She had never faced a true battle before. The soldiers had always been kind, but today they would fight against her for real. Shaw led her to a small open field where several soldiers were already waiting. They were armed with practice weapons, wooden swords and shields, ready for a sparring session. The air was thick with tension as the soldiers eyed Elira. They didn't think she could last. She wasn't one of them, and they had their doubts. "This is your first test, Elira," Shaw said. "You'll face them one by one. You need to use everything you've learned. No holding back." Elira's palms were sweaty as she gripped the wooden sword handed to her. She had never fought with a weapon before, only studied the strategies of battle. But she wasn't just a student anymore. She was a warrior in training. She could feel her heart thumping in her chest as she stepped forward, taking a deep breath. The first soldier was a young man, fast and agile. He attacked without hesitation, swinging his sword at Elira. She barely managed to block his first strike, her arms shaking with the effort. She could feel the power behind his attack, and for a moment, she almost lost her balance. But then she remembered what Shaw had told her. Strength is in your resilience. She took a step back, then swung her sword, managing to deflect his next attack. The fight was clumsy at first. Elira's movements were uncoordinated, her strikes weak and unsure. She couldn't keep up with the soldier's quick movements, but she didn't stop trying. With every blow that landed on her, she felt herself grow more determined. She couldn't give up, not after everything she had worked for. Minutes passed, and finally, with a swift move, Elira was able to knock the soldier's sword from his hands. He stepped back, looking surprised. Elira's breath was ragged, but she held her sword firmly, her eyes locked onto him. The soldiers watching from the sidelines seemed shocked. Elira hadn't won, but she had proven something. She had lasted longer than they had expected. She hadn't given up. Shaw nodded. "Good. You've passed the first test, but there's more to come. Keep pushing yourself." Elira felt a spark of pride in her chest. It wasn't a victory, but it was progress. She had fought her first real battle, and though she wasn't yet a master, she was one step closer to becoming the warrior she needed to be. Days turned into weeks, and Elira's training became even more intense. Her body had grown stronger, but the true test of her abilities had not yet come. Captain Shaw had watched her progress closely, pushing her limits with each new challenge. She had learned how to defend herself, how to fight with a weapon. But now, Elira would face a much larger, more dangerous test, one that would change everything. The Earth was in danger. A new enemy had arrived, a ruthless alien force that was terrorizing the planet. They were called the Zornax, and they had invaded Earth's outer territories. They had advanced weapons, terrifying creatures, and an army that was nearly unstoppable. The human military was doing all they could to hold them off, but the situation was growing dire. Shaw knew that if Earth was going to survive, they needed someone who could lead a counterattack. "Elira," Captain Shaw said, his voice serious, "I have a mission for you. The Zornax are getting closer. We can't wait any longer. I'm sending you and a team to stop them. This is your chance to prove everything you've learned." Elira's heart pounded in her chest as she heard those words. She had always known that her training would lead her to this moment, but now that it was here, She wasn't sure she was ready. Her fear started to creep in, but she forced it down. She had come this far. There was no turning back. Shaw gave her a brief nod. You'll be leading a small team of soldiers. They'll follow your orders. You'll use the skills you've learned here to defeat the Zornax. Elira nodded, though she felt the weight of the responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. She was not only leading her people's forces, but also representing her father's empire. If she failed, it wouldn't just be a failure for Earth, it would be a failure for the Archon. The team assembled, and together they boarded a transport ship. As they flew toward the battlefield, Elira couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread. This was her moment. The mission was dangerous, but it was the only way to stop the Zornax from reaching Earth's capital. She had no choice but to succeed. When they arrived at the battlefield, the landscape was filled with destruction. Buildings were in ruins, and the air was thick with smoke. The Zornax forces were everywhere, marching toward the city. Elira could hear the sounds of battle in the distance, the screams of soldiers, the hum of energy weapons. It was chaos. Elira stood tall, her heart racing, and turned to her team. "We fight for Earth," she said, her voice steady. "We fight for our future. Stay close, and stay sharp. We take them down together." With a final breath, she led her team into the fray. The Zornax were fierce, but Elira had trained for this. She fought alongside her soldiers, directing their movements with precision. Her weapon was a blur of speed and accuracy, her tactics flawless. She didn't just follow the plan. She adapted it in real time, using her keen mind to outsmart the enemy at every turn. The battle raged on, but Elira held her ground, pushing forward with determination. Every time she thought of giving up, she remembered the lessons she had learned. The strength and resilience, the power of will. She was no longer the fragile princess who had stepped onto Earth. She was a warrior, and she would fight for the survival of both her people and the humans who had helped her become strong. The battlefield was a blur of chaos. Elira's heart raced as she moved from one soldier to another, leading her team through the intense fight. The Zornax were relentless, their weapons cutting through the air with deadly precision. Their monstrous soldiers towered over the humans, their eyes glowing with malice, but Elira's team stood strong. She had trained them well, and they had learned to trust her every command. But the Zornax were unlike any enemy she had ever faced. Their technology was advanced, and their soldiers were terrifyingly strong. Despite Elira's best efforts, they were being pushed back. The team's numbers were dwindling, and the Zornax seemed to grow in strength with every passing minute. Elira was exhausted. Sweat dripped down her face, and her muscles burned from the constant movement. She had already been fighting for hours, but she couldn't afford to stop. Her people, Earth's people, depended on her. She couldn't let them down now. As they moved deeper into the Zornax lines, Elira spotted their leader, a towering figure, cloaked in dark armor, with eyes that glowed like burning embers. The leader's presence sent a chill through the air. Elira knew this was the one they needed to defeat. Without taking down the leader, the Zornax would never retreat. "Stay with me," Elira shouted to her team, her voice full of urgency. "We can win this. We fight together." With her sword raised, Elira charged toward the Zornax leader, her soldiers following behind her. The leader turned, his glowing eyes locking onto hers, and he raised a massive weapon that crackled with energy. Elira felt a wave of fear, but she pushed it down. This was her fight. She had to win. The Zornax leader swung his weapon, a flash of energy cutting through the air. Elira barely managed to dodge in time, the blast singing the edges of her armor. She knew this was going to be a battle like no other. The leader was powerful, far more than any of the Zornax soldiers she had fought before. Elira circled him, looking for an opening. The Zornax leader was faster than she had expected, his movements swift and precise. She couldn't match his strength, but she had learned to rely on her intelligence, to think her way through every situation. She wasn't just a fighter. She was a strategist. She feinted left, then quickly dodged to the right. The leader's weapon swung toward her, but she was already out of range. With a quick, practiced motion, Illyra moved in and struck at his armor. The blow landed, but the armor barely scratched. She wasn't giving up, though. Her mind raced, analyzing every weak point in his defense. Then she saw it, a small gap in the armor near the shoulder. It was her chance. Illyra took a deep breath and charged. With all her strength, she thrust her sword into the gap. The Zornax leader roared in pain, his massive weapon dropping to the ground. He staggered, his glowing eyes flickering. With one final push, Illyra twisted the sword, and the leader collapsed to the ground, defeated. The battlefield fell silent for a moment, as if even the air itself was waiting. The Zornax forces paused, unsure of what to do without their leader, and then Illyra's soldiers surged forward, emboldened by their victory. The tide of the battle shifted in their favor. The Zornax, leaderless and demoralized, began to retreat. Illyra stood tall, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She had done it. The battle wasn't over, but the Zornax had been defeated for the moment. She had led her team to victory. The battlefield was quiet now. The once dominant Zornax army was retreating, leaving behind broken armor and the echoes of their leader's fall. Illyra stood among the wreckage, her chest heaving, as she tried to catch her breath. She had led her soldiers to victory, but it had come at a heavy price. The ground was littered with the fallen, both human and alien. The victory was theirs, but the cost was clear. Illyra looked around, her heart heavy. Many of her soldiers had been injured in the fight. Some lay on the ground, barely conscious, while others were already being tended to by the medics. It wasn't just the physical wounds that hurt, it was the emotional toll of seeing so many lives lost. The weight of leadership was something she had never fully understood until now. Winning a battle was not the same as protecting the people you cared about. She walked over to one of the fallen soldiers, kneeling beside him. He was a young man, no older than 20, with a brave smile that had once filled Illyra with confidence. Now, that smile was gone, replaced by the cold stillness of death. Illyra closed her eyes for a moment, her heart aching. She had fought for this victory, but it had cost them more than she was willing to pay. "Princess," Captain Shaw said softly, walking up beside her. "You did well. The Zornax are retreating, and Earth is safe for now." Illyra nodded, but the praise didn't feel right. "But at what cost, Shaw? Look at them. Look at what we've lost." Shaw's expression softened. "Victory in battle always comes with a price. But it's not your fault. You gave everything you had to lead them. You saved Earth." Illyra didn't respond right away. She couldn't shake the feeling that the victory was hollow. She had come to Earth as a princess, but she had left that part of herself behind. Now she was a warrior, and warriors knew the cost of war. "I wasn't ready for this," Illyra whispered. "I thought I could lead them, that I could be strong, but I wasn't ready to lose people." Shaw looked at her with understanding. "No one is ever ready for loss, Illyra. You'll never stop feeling it, but you can choose how to honor those who gave their lives. You fight for the ones who are still here, for the ones who need you. That's what leadership is." Illyra wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. She had been trained for war, but she had not been prepared for the emotional toll it would take on her. She had wanted to prove herself to her father, to her people, to everyone who doubted her. But now she realized that strength wasn't just about physical power or winning battles. It was about the ability to carry the weight of loss and continue to move forward. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Zornax were not the only threat to Earth, and Illyra knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time, she felt a true sense of purpose. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader. "Thank you, Shaw," she said, her voice steady. "We've won today, but the real fight is just beginning." Shaw gave her a nod of respect. "We'll be ready, Princess." As Illyra looked out over the battlefield, she knew that Earth had survived. But it had also changed her. She wasn't the same person who had arrived on this planet. And no matter what came next, she would face it as a warrior, a leader, and a protector. In the weeks following the battle, Earth began to heal. The Zornak's threat had been pushed back, but the victory felt incomplete. Illyra spent her days with the survivors, offering her support and helping to rebuild. The loss of so many soldiers weighed heavily on her, and no matter how many times Captain Shaw reassured her, the pain remained. She had been given the mantle of leadership, but it was a burden she had not yet fully learned to carry. Despite the victory, Illyra knew that the war was far from over. The Zornaks were not a simple enemy that would retreat and give up. They were relentless, and soon more would come. The planet had been saved, for now, but Earth's safety was temporary. As long as the Zornaks still existed, there would always be a threat. Captain Shaw approached her one morning, his face grave. "Illyra, we've received reports from the outer colonies. The Zornaks aren't gone. They're regrouping. We need to prepare for another battle." Illyra nodded, though a deep sense of dread settled in her chest. She wasn't ready. She hadn't fully recovered from the last battle, and yet here she was, expected to lead her soldiers into another fight. She had become a warrior, yes, but at what cost? Could she continue to carry this weight? "Shaw," she said quietly, "how do you do it? Lead them through battle after battle without breaking." Shaw looked at her with a knowing expression. "It's not about being unbreakable, Illyra. It's about finding the strength to keep going, even when everything feels like it's falling apart. We don't do it for ourselves. We do it for the people who depend on us." His words resonated with her. She had always been taught that strength came from within, but now she understood. Strength wasn't just about power or skill. It was about the ability to push forward, no matter how heavy the burden felt. "I'll keep fighting," Illyra said, her voice steady. "For Earth, for everyone who's lost someone. I won't stop." Shaw nodded. "That's the spirit, but you're not alone in this. We all fight together." As the days passed, Illyra worked with Shaw and the rest of the military leaders to strategize for the upcoming battle. The Zornaks had regrouped faster than anyone had expected, and the next attack could come at any moment. The soldiers trained harder, knowing that their lives depended on their ability to fight as one. Illyra threw herself into her leadership role with renewed determination. She no longer saw herself as the weak princess who had arrived on Earth. She was a leader, a warrior who would do whatever it took to protect her people. The soldiers looked to her for guidance, and she would not fail them. When the day of the next battle arrived, Illyra stood at the front of her team, her sword raised high. The Zornaks had returned, and this time, they would be met with all the strength that Earth's defenders had to offer. "Today, we fight for the future of Earth," Illyra declared. "Today, we finish what we started. Stay strong. Stay united. We fight as one." Her soldiers raised their weapons in response, their faces determined. Illyra's heart swelled with pride. She wasn't just a leader now. She was a symbol of hope, and she would carry that symbol with everything she had. The air was thick with tension as Illyra and her team stood at the edge of the battlefield. The Zornaks were marching toward them, their monstrous forms casting long shadows across the ruined land. This time, they had brought everything: more soldiers, more weapons, and more of their terrifying war machines. It was the final battle, and Illyra knew that there could be no retreat. Earth's future depended on them. The soldiers around her were ready. They had trained for this moment. They had fought together before, and they would fight again. But this time, the stakes were higher. If they lost, Earth would fall, and the Zornaks would take everything. Illyra couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let that happen. Illyra looked around at her team. Captain Shaw was at her side, his face calm, but his eyes sharp with focus. The soldiers, once unsure of her, now trusted her with their lives. They followed her every command, and she could see the strength in their faces. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future. "Remember," Elira said, her voice steady, "we fight for Earth. We fight for the people who can't fight for themselves, and we fight together. Stay strong, stay sharp, and we will win." The soldiers cheered, their voices filled with determination. Elira's heart swelled with pride. These people, her team, had become her family. They were not just soldiers, they were friends, comrades, and protectors. They believed in her, and she would not fail them. The Zornak's leader, the same towering figure from the last battle, emerged from the ranks. He was even more menacing now, his armor reinforced with new weapons and technology. His eyes glowed with malice, and Elira could feel the weight of his gaze. He was ready to finish what he had started. Elira clenched her fists, feeling the familiar weight of her sword in her hand. She had faced him before, and she would face him again. This time, she would not hesitate. She would defeat him and end the Zornak's threat once and for all. With a roar, the battle began. The ground shook as the two forces clashed. Energy weapons fired, and the sounds of battle echoed across the field. Elira's soldiers moved with precision, following her lead as they cut through the Zornak's ranks. Elira was at the front, her sword flashing in the sunlight as she fought with all her strength. She was no longer the frightened princess who had stepped onto Earth. She was a warrior, a leader, and she would not back down. As she fought her way toward the Zornak's leader, Elira felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. This battle was hers. It was her responsibility to end it, to protect Earth and everything she had come to love. She could feel her muscles burning, her body exhausted from the long fight. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Finally, she reached the Zornak's leader. He was waiting for her, his massive weapon raised high. Elira dodged the first strike, then the second, her movements quick and calculated. She had learned his patterns, his weaknesses. This time, she was ready. With a roar, the Zornak's leader swung his weapon at her. Elira ducked, rolling to the side, and in one swift motion, she thrust her sword into the gap in his armor. The leader let out a final guttural scream as he collapsed to the ground, his weapon falling from his hand. The Zornak's forces hesitated, their morale shattered without their leader. Elira stood tall, her sword raised high, a symbol of victory. "We did it," she whispered to herself. "We won." But even as the battle ended and the Zornak's retreated, Elira knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new threats. But for now, Earth was safe, and she had led them to victory. The battle was over. The Zornak's had been defeated, their forces scattered, their leader fallen. The soldiers of Earth stood victorious, their weary faces showing the toll of the long fight. But amid the exhaustion and the wreckage, there was something else. Hope. The threat had been pushed back, and Earth had survived. For now, the future was theirs to rebuild. Elira stood among the soldiers, her armor battered, her body tired from the intense battle. She had fought with everything she had, but now, as the dust settled, she felt a strange sense of calm. The war had not been easy, and the losses had been heavy, but they had won. And with that victory, she felt the weight of leadership begin to shift. She was no longer just a warrior. She was the leader of a new world, one that was stronger, united, and ready to face whatever came next. "Princess," Captain Shaw said, his voice filled with respect. "We did it. Earth is safe because of you." Elira looked at him, her eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "We did it together, Shaw. Everyone played their part. I couldn't have done it without them, without you." Shaw smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "You've earned their trust. You've proven yourself as a leader, not just to them, but to yourself." Elira nodded, feeling the truth of his words. When she first arrived on Earth, she had been unsure of her place. She had been a princess, weak, sheltered, and unprepared for the challenges of war. But now she was something more. She had led her people to victory, faced her fears, and become a true leader, and in doing so, she had found her own strength. "We still have a long road ahead of us," Elira said, her voice steady. "There are more battles to come, and Earth's future is uncertain. But I know that we can face it together. We've already proven that." The soldiers gathered around her, their faces weary but filled with hope. They had followed her, fought alongside her, and trusted her. And now, they were ready for whatever came next. Earth was not just a planet. It was a symbol of survival, of resilience, and of the strength that came from unity. Elira looked out over the battlefield, the sun beginning to set in the distance. The war was over, but the peace they had won would need to be protected. The future was uncertain, but Elira was no longer afraid. She had proven to herself that she was capable of leading, capable of fighting, and capable of inspiring others to do the same. She turned to Captain Shaw. "What's next?" Shaw looked at her with a sense of pride. "We rebuild. We make Earth stronger. And we protect it. Together." Elira smiled. The battle for Earth might have ended, but the journey was far from over. There would be challenges, new enemies, and more tests of strength. But she was ready. Earth was no longer just a place she had come to. It was her home. And she would protect it with everything she had. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elira stood tall. The warrior, the leader, the protector. Earth's future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Elira would be ready for whatever came next.